Welcome to This Week in Health IT Influence, where we discuss the influence of technology on health with the people who are making it happen. Today, we talk to two of my favorite people in the industry, Schade and David Muntz from StarBridge Advisors. They are industry veterans. They are highly decorated CIOs of the Year, Innovation Fellows, you name it. They've done it all. My name is Bill Russell, Healthcare CIO coach and creator of This Week in Health IT, a set of podcast videos and collaboration events dedicated to developing the next generation of health leaders. This episode is sponsored by Health Lyrics. I coach health leaders on all things health IT. Coaching was instrumental in my success, and it is the focus of my work at Health Lyrics. I've coached CEOs of health systems, CTOs, CIOs, you name it. If you want to elevate your game in 2020, visit healthlyrics.com to schedule your free consultation. I recorded this episode in late 2019 prior to our studio move. A couple things about that. From a timing standpoint, Sue was in the middle or just getting ready to do an epic go live for a health system, in which she is now completed, and several months passed. My sound is actually not that good because we're in the middle of the studio move, but Sue and David sound great. We play a little health IT Jeopardy. I give them about 10 topics. They select the topic, and we talk about the state of the industry and where things are going. It's a lot of fun. I love their wisdom, and they just do a fantastic job. Great guests. I hope you enjoy. Today, I'm excited to be joined by two leaders of StarBridge Advisors, previous guests of the show, Sue Schade and David Muntz. Good morning, you two.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Wow, and you guys are kind enough to be testing out this new format for me, where we're trying to do three guests. We'll try not to talk over each other because the video sort of bounces between us, but we'll see how it goes. As previous guests, we're not going to go into your credentials, but would it be fair to sum it up by saying highly decorated industry veterans, or is that offensive?
Whatever. We're okay with that. Thank you, Bill. We'll try to live up to that.
Former, Information Officer of the Year, Innovation Officer, Legacy Award winner. You get the picture. You guys have seen a lot of action in healthcare, and have been successful at doing it. Today, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to do State of the Industry. I have 8 categories, and here's what we'll do. We'll just, we'll do it like we'll do it a little bit like a game. I'm going to put out the 8 categories. Sue, you can go first by picking whatever category, and then what we're going to do is we're going to talk about what's the state of the industry, health IT today, and what's the next step, where we're going. Not maybe what's 10 years from now or 5 years from now, but what's the next step. And so the 8 categories are IT operations and security, IT budgeting, governance, EHR implementations and optimization, mentoring and training, staffing, innovation, and experience, either internal experience or consumer experience. And Sue, we'll give you the first choice of the category for this episode.
It's like Jeopardy. Okay, I'm going to take EHR implementation optimization.
Yes, because that's right where you're living right now. So what's the state? What's the state of the industry? And we'll start with you, Sue. I mean, what's the state of the industry from your seat, and potentially what's the next step for us?
Sure. So, state of the industry versus a place I'm working right now where we have a big epic go live in 42 days. Something like that. Overall, I think a lot of organizations have the EHR implementation behind them. You get that sense looking at the industry at this point. However, there are still pockets where that's not the case. And due to merger and acquisition, there's still a lot of implementation activity going on. And I think those organizations that are in the throes of that are heads down on that. They're not focusing on telehealth, which has become table stakes, or, digital health and consumer engagement. Obviously they're dealing with, basic operations and security and other challenges that they have. But when they're in the midst of, the EHR implementation and then that post period of optimization, it is just heads down.
It is heads down. So let's, and it's interesting because you just gave us 3 other topics, which we're gonna, digital health and telehealth.
Nice segue, huh? Yeah.
We're gonna ignore that, but I'll kick it over to you, David, on this topic, which is there is still a lot of consolidation going on in the industry. So you have, I see these different jobs that are coming across and different consulting opportunities that are coming across, and it has a lot to do with the integration of two disparate systems, if not three or four disparate systems. Do we ever see let me start with this question. Is it a good and right goal to get your entire health system on the same EMR? Let's start there. And then the next one, which is, if it is, how do we continue to do, maybe walk and chew gum, do that as well as do some of the other things that are going to move the health system forward?
Sure. Well, I'm going to go ahead and take the less popular approach, if you don't mind. Probably be a little more provocative on this. I've always believed, even though I see the pendulum swinging, that you really have to live in a multi-vendor environment, that you can't escape it. And it's certainly desirable to have your primary hub come from one vendor. And the reasons are pretty obvious. People, use the probably not necessarily nice approach, one throat to choke. They talk about the integration they expect to see, and they expect that the products will develop more quickly. And I'm not sure I agree with all of those benefits. And the fact is that the world that we live in is being bombarded by new apps, new applications, new vendors, new ways to do things. And if you really want to go through a transformation, you can't wait on that central vendor to do the work. And innovation depends on you being able to have APIs that attach to the vendor that sits at the center, and that's not necessarily in the best interest of the vendor. So I would challenge that even though a central vendor is important, it certainly is not the only place you should focus. And you need to figure out how to do real integration, and that's not just interfaces. That's also looking at APIs and figuring out a way to incorporate new ways of thinking, new ways of working. And, the government, and having served in the government during a time where meaningful use was there, people talked about APIs, but the APIs were limited to essentially pulling data out of the electronic health records. And what I think we missed the boat on completely was the ability for us to say we want to provide APIs that are going to ingest data from other sources. And as we start to do analytics, you'll see that data is getting pulled from all kinds of sources, many of which are not EHRs. It's pulling information from census data, pulling information from community services, et cetera. So I'd like to see us embrace the multi-vendor environment. And I see a lot of companies, I've seen these companies where you have one of the two big vendors come together, and then all of a sudden they take one portion of the organization and they move it to the other vendor because they think the consolidation of the vendors makes sense. And it's really the consolidation of the data that makes sense. And you're going to have to do that regardless of how many vendors you have in the space. So not a big fan of single vendor approaches.
Yeah, you know what, that is pretty provocative. Although if you've been in the consulting world, as we have been for the last 3 or 4 years, I mean, I've seen those requests come in of, hey, we merged these two organizations. And think about how silly this is. We're a Cerner shop, and we just implemented Epic at this hospital, and we're getting rid of Epic over here, or vice versa. We just finished our Cerner implementation a year ago at this health system, but it got acquired. Now we're taking it to Epic. I mean, just the whiplash on that organization from a culture standpoint has to be pretty significant. But Sue, I'll let you have the last word on this. What's next for us? What are we looking at? Are we going to get better at optimization? Are we going to get better to the point where this whole idea of clinician burnout and clinician fatigue around the EHR starts to dissipate?
Well, I would hope so. There's been a lot about physician burnout, the class, Arch Collaborative, right? That whole effort really focused in on that. I've listened to some of the reports out of that, and there's the usability factor of the EHRs, and there's the training factor. And we're in the midst again right now, going back to where I'm working. We're in the midst of the training piece, and that's absolutely critical to help address that. Are we going to get better? I mean, we have to get better. There's always lessons learned that the vendors and the consultants are bringing forward from client to client. So we absolutely have to. And I think what you're seeing, we've all been around a while, with more foundational products and not doing all the customization, that changes the whole optimization piece. It may open up more needs in terms of optimization because an organization says, well, the vanilla just doesn't work for us. At the same time, it may reduce that whole optimization piece as the organization tries to get to a more common, vanilla is probably a bad word, but a more common approach. So I don't know, that's a tough one in terms of the, what's the silver bullet around optimization and getting these EHRs to the point they need to be. So we've got happy, efficient physicians and clinicians.
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of the CIOs I'm talking to are ramping up and trying to figure out that quarterly update thing. That's from Epic. Yeah. That's going to be a pretty significant change and lift for a lot of IT organizations. All right, so that sort of gives us this is what it feels like. It's not a deep dive into any one of these, but it's sort of a high level. David, if I had to guess what topics, remember IT operations, security, budgeting, governance, mentoring and training, staffing, innovation, and experience. Which one would you like to talk about?
Probably governance.
How did I know you were going to talk about governance?
Not security. Okay.
Not government. So anyway, the thing that I've noticed is the lack thereof in many organizations. And, sometimes, governance is such a broad category, but people define it, generally speaking, in terms of demand management. But the place where I see the greatest need right now is for data. We have a data tsunami on us. And, I've said the interesting thing about a tsunami is a tsunami would be fabulous if you could harness the energy that's associated with one. But the difficulty is that the water just comes ashore and destroys everything. And I see a similar situation for data. We get a tsunami of data, but if we can't harness it and figure out how to use it, what's relevant, and how to incorporate it all well, then we're going to fail. And, as we add social determinants of health, all that does is increase the amount of information that's flowing our way. So I would suggest that where we need to focus is on three different things that are all related. And the first one is the data governance, which deals essentially with the small elements, then with information governance, which is radically different than data governance, but also is important to figure out how we're going to take the raw material that's been processed and use it in ways that make sense. And then finally, one that I don't see anybody paying a lot of attention to, and that's knowledge governance. And it's like once you have the information and you've made a discovery that is going to potentially have a great impact, or you discovered something that's having a harmful impact, how do you take the knowledge and distribute it? And, you hear in medicine all the time about it takes 17 years from the time something happens or is discovered until the time we actually use it in our everyday lives. And so with data and all the information that could be generated and the knowledge that could be spread, how do we take advantage of that? And then finally, and I know it's not necessarily related to the other three, but I think it's probably at a higher level, and that's innovation governance. Innovation should not be a hobby or a game. Innovation should be, I think, founded in pragmatism and practicality. And if you can't figure out how to use all the three things I just talked about in an innovative way to transform what it is we're doing now, then innovation is great, but it's not as effective as we want it to be. So I put that governance wrapper around all of those things and think it's important that we pay attention to those.
What's interesting is we've heard death by pilot is now a term that we're hearing pretty often. In that, you can spin up a pilot. It seems like it's no big deal to spin up a pilot, but if you spin up too many of them, you lose focus, you lose energy, and potentially people get sort of lost in the whole thing. And data governance is another one that I find interesting because I talked to Dale Sanders at the Health Catalyst Summit. And one of the things he pointed out was that we have an opportunity with analytics to show the value that all this work has meant over the last decade or so around the EHR. I mean, because we're going to get some real valuable data and some real game changers essentially out of this data if we work it right. But if we do it incorrectly, we stand on a cliff where we could like jam this in at the wrong places in the wrong ways and really drive the clinicians even further away because we aren't doing it in a way that he keeps using the words empathy, but is I keep coming back to the word design. That's designed to help. It's listening and understanding, and then putting that data back to work in a way that they're asking for it to help.
Well, I think. Oh, I'm sorry, but to your point, I think analytics fits on the innovation. I mean, on the information and knowledge governance levels, and is just part of the activities. But what I've seen and just talked to a very prestigious organization that everybody would know, and one of the things they were celebrating was the fact that everybody is able to pull data and use it. And it's like, well, who's directing the formulation of the right questions to do the investigations that are going to mean something? And so it's kind of unharnessed creativity, and people can be very innovative, but again, without having some way to tie together the activities and marshal the resources, which are precious in every organization, it really adds more chaos than direction, and I think that's part of the issue. And by the way, death by pilot, I have now advised the people who used to report to me when I was a CIO and all the clients to stop using that word and use the word demonstration. The idea is a pilot kind of infers that I infer from pilot that a failure is a potential. Use the word demonstration, and it's like you've got confidence in your idea and you're going to show its value as opposed to take a chance on the fact that something might fail.
So David, I'm going to come back to you on what's next. Sue, any thoughts around governance?
Sure. One broad comment around governance is one size doesn't fit all. Yet every organization needs help here, from what I can tell. And my experience in the last couple of years doing interims, every organization I've gone into has had some gap area around governance, and some of it pretty basic that would surprise you. So it absolutely has to be addressed. And I think David did a good job of kind of outlining some of the different components of it. I like the point about innovation governance, because I think this is something, and maybe that's one of your categories that we can pick, but I don't think people talk about innovation governance so much. It's more about, who's in charge of innovation, what are the different roles, where does IT fit? So we can get into that maybe when we pick innovation. Oh gosh, I was going to say something else about governance, but it escapes me. Go ahead.
So David, what's next? Where do we go from here?
In terms of industry, or are you talking about activities?
Yeah, so we try to be pragmatic on this show, and
sure.
So some CIOs are listening and they're going, how do I identify the gaps in my governance, and how do I shore that up?
Well, I'll just pick two, and I'll let you pick out which direction we go. But one is, of course, the ERPs. We didn't even talk about them, but the fact is they've been ignored for so long. I see an awful lot of activity with people investigating ERPs and now coming back to pay attention to all the things that are necessary. And, when you look at the cost of healthcare, the biggest portion of our spend is on staff. Okay, so that relates to the staffing issue. And the second biggest portion of the budget is supply chain. And that counts for about 90% of all the spend that goes on in a healthcare institution. So if you're trying to look for efficiencies and efficacy, and trying to reduce costs and be smarter, ERPs are a natural place where we should be spending some of our time pulling forward, systems that may be as much as a decade old. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. The other thing I was going to mention, and this was related to mergers and acquisitions, and what happens afterwards, it's somewhat related to governance, is systems. and that is the ability of an organization to act consistently across all the different components. And so I'd offer those two as places where there's opportunity for discussion and opportunity for improvements in every organization.
So I'm going to pick the next topic. Gosh, I could go off of that for a little while, but I'm going to pick the next topic and keep us moving, and that's IT budgeting. So a couple of things. I'll sort of set it up, and then Sue will go to you next on this. Here's what I'm seeing. There's pressure on the IT budget. There's still an education that needs to happen at the executive level, if not the board level, on the need for ongoing maintenance of the equipment and maintenance of the tools that you've purchased. I think it's interesting that we're still seeing people go, "Hey, we want a 4% cut from IT." And when you think about a 4% cut from IT, it's kind of it's almost silly to ask for a 4% cut from IT, because you're sitting there going, "Well, I can't cut my EHR implementation because, after it's done, after the capital." Because they're not going to renegotiate the license. We're still using all the parts we're using. You're not going to renegotiate your PAC system. So there's a whole bunch of fixed costs that once you buy it, they're just fixed costs. And then there's cost of operating those things. And so when they say 4% to IT, essentially you cut out like 70% of the budget, which you can't cut anyway. And then what they're really saying is, now the 4% of the total, you now have to get out of 30% of your budget, which, if you do the math, is pretty significant cut from IT. And so we keep having these conversations, and I think it's why a lot of health systems have spent the time to put things like Aptio in and whatnot, so that they can justify the spend and educate the executives. I'm curious, Sue, we'll start with you. I'm curious, are we seeing that across the board, or is that just a handful of clients that I've run into?
It's what I'm running into with clients, and I think it's probably fairly common at this point. The pressures on healthcare organizations are going to continue, and everybody's got to hold the line and find ways to reduce costs. So I don't think that's going to change. I think a couple things that need to happen, you say CIOs are listening, what do you need to do? Fundamentally, if you are not aligned with your executives and the board about the value of IT, you are going to have an uphill battle when it comes to any of these budget conversations. And I think there's organizations, unfortunately, in 2019 that are still in that position, though I think many are not. I think the value of IT has become a lot clearer. The other thing that I would say is we all, everybody, IT, every functional area has a fiscal responsibility within the organization to be as cost effective as possible. And, I know in all my years of working as a CIO, and you're at the table annually, and that annual budget process can take months in some organizations, and you're listening to what all other executives are asking for and making your case for what you need in IT. And, the days of being able to pad the budget and, just really rapid increases in growth in IT budgets at the expense of some other things are way gone. So you are negotiating what you need with your peers. When it comes to your comment, Bill, about maintenance and that core, there's a core that you can't take away. Right? And if you can tee up for your executives, this is the baseline. You cannot take this away. But if this is all I have, I'm not doing anything new. We're just keeping the trains running, the doors open, whatever you want to say. So what you need to do is always be getting, that needs to be as efficient as possible, right? At the baseline, I think we all agree. And you need to create the capacity for the new, the add-on, and show the value of it.
So David, we'll give you the last word on budgeting, because I know you're dying to talk about this topic. But I guess I'll take the question a little different for you, and that is, should we expect health IT budgets to continue to grow? And what areas within the health IT budget should we be looking to minimize or reduce?
Great question, by the way. I agree entirely with what Sue is saying, my experience as well. And by the way, I always love budgeting. So, I'm one of the peculiar CIOs. But part of the reason was the governance process that we had in place, where IT did not make decisions about priorities or how the money would get spent. And instead, what we did was we went to the users and said, how would you like us to spend the money? You are generating the revenues that we are using. So I think that was a big deal. What we came up with was, instead of using ROI, because the net present value of every infrastructure purchase we made was always negative. So we could never compete if you looked at it from pure ROI or NPV standpoint. So we created what's called a value investment, which is a much broader, different view of things. And it looks at the traditional ROI, and it looks at the flexibility that you get with the investment you're making. It looks at the intangibles that are going on, and it looks at the risks of not performing or upgrading part of your infrastructure. And then finally, there's a social value from a patient's perspective about what IT should do. And so I think it's important to look at this ROI or budgeting radically differently. So again, making the business case for that was huge. And, the other thing that's happening in the industry, and I've said this again, I think it's a little provocative, but I see the infrastructure has really reached commodity status. And so rather than making IT the burden of the CIO or the person responsible for the digital health strategy, to me, that's just the cost of doing business. And to the degree that you could outsource your infrastructure, then people are going to pay for it. Then the difference is, it's like buying pizza by the slice. The more you consume, it's going to be a variable cost as opposed to a fixed cost. And if you can make the leap to move all of your IT or the bulk of your IT cost from fixed to variable, now the budgeting becomes a whole different matter. And because if it has reached commodity status or utility status, it's just like saying we're not going to air conditioning the facilities, or we're not going to put water out through the facilities. It's IT becomes just one more utility. And then we get to focus on the analytics and the other things where we are truly chief information or chief innovation officers who are helping drive the business as opposed to being driven by the business.
Again, I could go off of that.
We're teasing you.
Very, very, very easily. Because the infrastructure has become commoditized. We're hearing that from a lot of the forward-leaning CIOs, but it is provocative still amongst a significant portion of the group who still believes that the cloud is not secure, it's not to be trusted, and so forth. And we'll see how that all plays out. I really want to thank David and Sue for taking the time to join us this week. You're going to have to come back next Friday, for the second part of this episode. They were kind enough to give me about an hour of their time, and we just ran through these topics and just had a good time talking about them. They are so knowledgeable and articulate. It's always great to have them on the show. Special thanks to our channel sponsors, StarBridge Advisors, VMware, Galen Healthcare, Pro Talent Advisors, and Health Lyrics for choosing to invest in developing the next generation of health leaders. Please come back every Friday for more great interviews with influencers. And don't forget, every Tuesday we take a look at the news, which is going to impact health IT. This show is a production of This Week in Health IT. For more great content, you check out our website at thisweekhealth.com or the YouTube channel as well. If you want to help out the show, one of the best ways to do that is to recommend it to a peer. Send them a note, tell them you're getting value out of the show and that they should listen to it. We really appreciate that, and we really appreciate your support of the show. Thanks for listening. That's all for now.